A long time ago, my grandfather grew up in a rural section of the Appalachian Mountains. He loved it there. He said there was peace in those mountains that he never found anywhere else. The air was clean and crisp, and the woods were incredibly quiet, which I guess some people don't like. I was used to it, though, since it was all I'd ever known. But he told me that he had an encounter with some of his hunting buddies one year that changed his feelings about this place forever. This was during hunting season. His uncle had come up from Florida to go white-tailed deer hunting with some family and friends. He had come up a little before the season started, so he, his dad, older brother, and a couple of friends could go over all their gear and get ready for the hunt. He had a dog that was part Alaskan Husky and part German Shepherd. He said how he would go hiking pretty often, and his dog Max would always go with him. He was a good-sized dog, given the two breeds he was mixed from. He didn't scare easily and was really protective. The day before the hunting season was starting, we were out on one of our usual hikes. They would go up the hill behind his parents' house to an old coal mining road. There were a couple cold water springs near the road and some deep forest. Usually when he got within 100 feet or so of the springs, Max would run ahead to get a drink and cool off. Well, he took off, and because of the trees and brush, he couldn't see him. But he knew where he would be. He stopped and took a drink from his canteen. As soon as he started moving again, he heard Max running back down the hill. I guess he figured he was coming back to check on him, but he was running full force with a panicked look on his face. I'd never seen that look before. He turned around to look up the hill and he bared his teeth. Then he started growling, very low and very frightening. He was standing stock still, just facing up the hill. Grandpa called his name and he gave a big yelp and took off running full force down the hill again. He thought that was odd, but he kept heading up. Max would just go on home if that's what he wanted to do. He said, "I was hoping to see what might have spooked him. There wasn't much wildlife to be feared at the time. Usually just squirrels, chipmunks, deer, possums, and such. The scariest thing might be a bobcat or a bear, but I'd never seen one the whole time I'd lived there." I reached the top of the hill without seeing anything scary. I was leaving when I spotted these antlers through the trees. There was a lot of rustling noise coming from that spot, which was a little weird because in my experience, deer are usually so quiet. I couldn't imagine Max getting spooked by a deer. He'd been around plenty of them. Anyway, I hoped it was a good sign of whitetail in the area for the start of hunting the next day. I turned to head down and suddenly I was hit with this absolutely putrid smell of rotten flesh. Like if you forgot some meat in your fridge for months and then opened it up. So Grandpa said he headed out of there and got home and found Max in the yard waiting for me. He seemed really restless, pacing around. I couldn't figure him out. He told his uncle and everyone that I'd spotted a deer. They were excited to get going in the morning. They got up at the first light and headed out. We were real pros when it came to deer hunting. His father had found a spot he liked and had set up the blind the week before. He said, "We got to the blind, which was set up near a stand of oaks in sight of the stream. I had binoculars with me so I could do some bird watching while we were sitting there. Waiting on deer can get incredibly boring. You have to be so quiet." We'd probably been there a couple hours when we started hearing this high-pitched sound that sounded like a wounded animal or something. We didn't see anything. It could have been anything. But the next thing that happened was we were hit with the terrible smell of rotting meat. My God, I can't describe it. It smelled like death. My uncle gasped and pointed toward the creek. He had his hand over his nose trying to cover up the smell. We looked and saw this horrible apparition rise up out of the creek, and it was standing there maybe yards away. It was something tall and skeletal. The head looked like a deer skull with antlers and yellow eyes glowing out of the sockets. I swear it was 7 feet tall and it seemed like it had tattered flesh just hanging off its body. It walked on 2 legs, and they looked like the legs of a deer. It seemed like something you would dig out of a grave, but it was moving and scanning the forest. We all just crouched there, peering out of the blind. It didn't seem to have seen us. We were petrified and just stayed quiet and didn't move a muscle. Then it lifted its head and stared into the distance like it had spotted something. And then it just flashed away at superhuman speed. I can't even describe how it moved. It was just gone. He told me that they went down to the stream where the creature was and saw, and not far off in the brush surrounded by propped-up rocks and vegetation, was what they believed to be a deer carcass. However, upon further investigation, it was definitely not a white-tailed deer. It was way too large, and the antlers were huge. He said that he believed it was the carcass of one of these woods creatures they all saw earlier. The next day, they brought a camera with them and took a picture holding the remains of this carcass. He said, "This was the only proof that we had found something in those woods that was not a known species of animal." We started to hear those high-pitched sounds again and laid the skeleton down, and we ran out of there so fast we couldn't even speak. We all sped down the mountain like our lives depended on it. To this day, he said that they still don't know what they saw or even how to explain it without sounding crazy. He never saw the carcass or creature again and seemed a bit sad that he didn't feel comfortable in those woods anymore. I've heard other stories that are similar, but never from any of my family members. I feel like that was a really close call for him. A pipe burst in my bathroom, so I had no choice but to find somewhere to stay while they brought in professionals to fix it. I had moved in only 4 months before this, so I was annoyed, as you can imagine. I live in a big-time college football town, so to make matters worse, all the hotel rooms were taken for a big game on Saturday. After frantic phone calls, I found a small place renting one last room. It wasn't close to town, and I couldn't even find a website for it. But it was my only choice, and I needed some place to stay. When I arrived, I thought maybe it was a joke. The place looked like a house so run down it could have been out of business. I parked my car on a gravelly slope and walked into the little door marked "Office." A small woman gave me my key and led me deeper into the house. In the back corner, she opened a door and flipped a light switch. A naked bulb flashed to life in the center of the ceiling. Suddenly, something screamed a blood-curdling sound from outside. I almost jumped. The small woman seemed totally unperplexed, like she'd heard it 1,000,000 times. She left me alone in the room. I wasn't feeling the vibe at all. I threw my luggage down on the bed and walked back to my car. This place might be okay for a night, but no way was I staying here for more than that. If I had to drive a town over or even 100 miles to find a place to stay, I'd do it. I jumped in my car and heard another loud screaming noise. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere all at once. The woman watched me from the dingy window of the small office. I backed out and started driving down the road. I was driving slowly because the road was bumpy and full of large rocks and potholes. As I was dodging a big jagged hole in the road, I saw something from the corner of my eye. I couldn't really make out what it was, but it seemed big, like an animal maybe. I slowed the car like an idiot, not paying attention. I looked out the window to see if I could get a better look at whatever it was out there in the trees. I saw nothing, but then I felt a big jolt. My right front tire had rolled into the hole when I was busy looking out the window, probably at nothing. The car wouldn't move. My tire spun and kicked up gravel and dirt. If anything, pressing on the accelerator only made it worse and dug the tire deeper into the ground. I climbed out and looked at the mess I'd made. My car wasn't going anywhere without some help. I cursed at my luck and my own stupidity. I was tired and getting scared. Something in the trees moved around, making scuttling sounds, scraping noises. Tree branches cracked and sputtered. I looked all around trying to see what was there, but completely afraid of what I might see. Still, there was nothing. I heard the screaming again, but now more guttural. Was it closer? I wasn't sure. The sound felt like it was coming from the trees themselves. I pulled out my phone. No reception. Of course. What the heck was I doing out here? I felt so dumb, and now afraid on top of that. I looked back toward the house where I was staying. It wasn't far, but neither was it close. Maybe the length of a football field away from where I stood. I started walking back the way I'd come when I heard another guttural cry, and this time I saw a tree move and a branch break off and fly off to the right. I panicked and hurried back to my car to find something, anything I might use to defend myself. The only thing I had was the ice scraper. I held it in front of me with both hands like a sword, like a silly sword. But I was scared and my fear was only growing. I walked back toward the house as quickly as I could. Something was in the trees, and it was moving at the same pace as me, crunching leaves under whatever its feet were. I stopped again and looked all around. I thought I could make out a particularly dark spot in the shade in the trees. I froze and watched that spot. I started walking very slowly again and didn't dare move my eyes from the spot in those trees. Suddenly, the screen door on the house creaked open and banged shut with a clutter. The shadow in those trees moved. I swear, I was so scared I couldn't stop shaking and I dropped the ice scraper. I wished more than anything I had someone with me. I couldn't bend down to grab the ice scraper. My legs wouldn't bend. I started running for the house. I was afraid it was the wrong way to go, but going the other way was even scarier. I needed to be inside. I made it to the door and pulled it open. I came inside, breathing hard, gasping to catch my breath. The old woman was sitting at the table playing solitary. She looked unfazed. Something scraped the wall directly outside the small window in the kitchen, beside the woman. I heard another scream. This time it was definitely close. Was it an animal or human? I couldn't tell, and that made it even worse. I closed the door in my room and locked it. I sat on the bed and listened for that awful scream. I didn't hear it again, and I didn't sleep either. I thought I heard doors in the house open and close through the night. I sat on the bed all night until the sun came up. I think it was Wednesday and the weather had been bad for a couple weeks. Windy and rainy, making me stuck inside most of the time. I was sitting on the couch trying to read a book. My brother and a couple friends were playing video games and making loud, stupid jokes. I got up, threw my book down, and walked to the kitchen. I opened the cupboard for a snack. The cereal box was empty, and we were out of Pop-Tarts. I felt cheated, which feels silly looking back. I decided to get in better mood and go get cereal. I could take a bike ride through the woods over to the store. A win-win all around. I opened the garage door and was blasted by the cold air. Fall where I'm from sucks and winter is worse. The wind was ripping and I could see my breath. I knew my hands would hurt when I got home and my face was going to be frozen. I fastened my helmet and zipped my jacket. I turned my bike off the road and onto the path through the woods. Runners and jogger sand people walking their dogs were always using the path. The woods are pretty, I guess. To me, they were just trees. But the path was smooth, and it was easy to ride my bike on it. I rode along the path for a bit, just trying to relax and listen to the wind without getting blown over into the dirt. It started raining a little, and the leaves were stirred up from the wind. They made the trail harder to see, and the leaves were wet and slick. I slowed down to ride over a shiny pile of leaves. Suddenly, I smelled something awful, like a fart. My tires almost slip on the slimy leaves. I stopped my bike and sniffed the air. It was awful. I pedaled faster and got away from that area of the woods. The smell wasn't as bad after a minute or so. When I left the woods, I went to the store and bought a box of cereal. I threw it in my backpack and got on my bike. I thought about going around the woods, taking the long way through the neighborhood. I didn't want to run into any more of that terrible smell, but going around would take a lot longer, and it was getting colder every second that passed. My hands already hurt and were turning pink. I pedaled toward the entrance to the path. The smell hit me at once. It was like the entire woods was one big hard-boiled egg. I tried holding my breath and riding my bike faster, but that was dumb. I gasped for air and was hit with the smell again, stronger now. I felt like I might throw up. The only way to get away from the smell was through the woods. One way to go: forward. I felt scared for the first time, being in the woods alone. The wind was picking up and it pushed that gross smell into my face and up my nose. The smell was so strong now it was burning my eyes. I could feel terrors coming up from the smell and the bitter cold. I rounded a bend on the path and my bike slid out from under me. I didn't go down hard because I wasn't riding too fast. But I rolled and my bike slid and sailed off the path into wet leaves and under a soggy bush. As I sat up, I saw something. I thought it was a huge bat, but that made no sense. I rubbed my eyes. When I looked back, it was a little to the right, and now it looked like an emaciated horse. The thing, that's the word that came to me. Its eyes looked like yellow egg yolks, and it stuck its tongue out. It was long, too long. I felt a chill run up my spine. The thing stood up taller. It kept going. It must have 10 feet tall. I could see ribs through a long black torso. The legs were bowed out like a wonky goat. The smell was so strong now, it was all I could think about. That and whatever the hell was standing there in the woods only 20 feet from me. The thing in front of me lifted its arms and spread these long, disgusting wings. It looked like something out of a kid's nightmare. My nightmare. The wings were scaled like a dragon or the toes of a frog. Those eyes stared into mine and the smell got even worse. I swear the eyes on that thing turned from yellow to red, and they shrunk down to hot red beads in the long, freakish face. I couldn't move, but I had to. I couldn't sit there and wait for whatever it was to come toward me. I crawled toward my bike under the bushes. I kept one eye on that beast. The giant head slowly turned and was following me with that goblin-like stare. And then a miracle happened. Maybe, I don't know. It seemed like a miracle at the time. 3 joggers came down the path toward me. They stopped a little ahead of me and asked if I was okay. Some kid crawling on top of wet leaves on a path. I looked to the joggers to see where the thing had been standing. It was gone. The smell was still strong, but it was going away. Following the thing I'd seen. The joggers could smell it too. I pulled my bike out from under the bush and pedaled past the joggers as fast I could. I've never told anyone what I saw out there. But when someone asks me to ride my bike through the woods, I say I'd rather go around. The East Coast wasn't the easiest place to be when you were on your own at 18. I don't mean that it was hard or particularly unforgiving. It was just expensive. Everywhere is expensive now, though. At least I guess that means everyone will be able to relate to the setting I'm about to describe. I was 18, working as many hours as I could each week, and living out of a single bedroom that I was renting in a rough neighborhood. There were 4 rooms in the single-story building, if you included the living room, and each room was rented by a different person. I had the room in the back. I had to walk through 2 other living areas just to reach my door. Once inside, the room wasn't impressive either. I had enough space for a twin-sized mattress and a dresser. The area between the dresser and the mattress was just big enough to stand in, unless you needed to open the drawers. To the left of that dresser, back toward the door, there was also a window. I couldn't afford curtains. The old blinds that hung there did their best to block out the light. Unfortunately for me, there was light in that window 24/7. The house I was living in used to sit next to a bank. The bank building had been demolished, but the parking lot was still in place. The lights still lit up in that lot each night right at sundown, and they shined on through the morning. It often cast my room in an uncomfortable electric glow. Those nights I was tired enough to sleep through anything. One night I woke suddenly with my eyes fixated on the window. I didn't have to blink any weariness away from my vision. I wasn't confused or disoriented. I was immediately alert. My eyes knew exactly where to look the moment that they opened. There was a dark silhouette framed against my window. They weren't outside. They weren't in the parking lot. They were on my side of the blinds. The light coming in from behind them made their features hard to make out. I stood anyway. I thought what I was facing was a thief who had slipped in from the outside. When I leaped to my feet, occupying the little space between the intruder and myself, I realized how wrong I was. I wasn't struggling to make out their features because of the light. They had no features at all. Their body was a smooth black void, darker than the further corners of my room. Looking at them felt empty. It felt like they were hollow, sucking out the light like a black hole. My body went cold. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe to scream. The shape looked familiar. It was sort of like a man. Legs, torso, arms, and shoulders. But it felt sinister. I knew all at once that it was there to hurt me. It would kill me if I let it. But there was no fighting this thing. Even if I could move, what would I do? I never got to answer that question because it moved first. It reached out with one arm and sunk its hand into my chest. It didn't cut me. It passed into me like my skin and bones weren't even there. I felt each digit of its cold hand wrap one at a time around my heart. I've never been so physically aware of where each organ sits in my body. The cold chill of the apparition's touch may as well have been shining a light on my insides. I was confident the end was coming. I felt myself tremble. I felt tears stream down my face. I started praying in my mind, frantically begging God to spare my life. In my inner monologue, I was rambling about everything I had left to do. I'd do so many good things, I promised. I had never prayed before. I didn't know I believed in a higher power until that moment. I prayed hard and fast and felt my heartbeat slow. I felt the thing in my window get angry. All of a sudden, it released its grip. The apparition shoved me backward. I landed on my bed and crawled hurriedly into the corner. I brought my knees to my chest and stared, eyes glued to the window. There was no shape there anymore. No silhouette stood in the dark, pretending to be a man. But the tears were still on my face. My heart was racing, but I could still feel the places where the thing had coiled its fingers. I sat there all night, wide awake and waiting. When the sun rose, I left that room and called my best friend. He was nice enough to pretend to believe me. He couldn't offer me any advice or tell me what it was, not that I expected him to. Still, the lack of answers kept me asking. I looked around online. I had a few people message me anonymously with their own theories. I've heard everything from demons to aliens at this point. I don't know what to believe. Did praying really help? Does that tell me it was divine? I stopped talking about the encounter for years. All it did anymore was hike my anxiety and earn me a few quizzical stares. I kept reminding myself that it could have been a dream. There's a chance, right? There's a chance that it didn't push me back onto the bed. Maybe I was just waking up for real that time. It's been more than 12 years now. I haven't seen the silhouette again, but now I have a child of my own. My child might be staring at their own window one day, seeing what I saw. I need to know now. I need to know so that if it does come back, I'm not helpless like I was before. What was that thing shaped like a man? Let me start off by saying this. I am no conspiracy theorist. I am not someone who just sits around on Facebook all day trying to catch up on whatever crazy things that some crazy people are pushing through their keyboards. I see myself as somewhat of a nomad or whatever. I've lived out of my van once for a while. Me and my van, see, we've been through a lot together. Traveling the country, avoiding rent, general van life perks. One of the things that is not a perk of living in your van, though, is parking out in creepy places without necessarily knowing how safe it's going to be. At this time, coming up on a year ago now, I was doing somewhat of a tour through the northwestern part of the country. I wanted to see some of the natural sights, tourism stuff, the works. I ended up staying near one of these really gorgeous parks in Washington state. It was secluded, had a lot of cool plants around, and most importantly, it was legal for me to park there, so I decided on that spot to park the van while I stayed there. A little spoiler alert, I did not pick an ideal spot. The area itself wasn't that creepy, just kind of in the middle of nowhere. You could tell that not a lot of people came around there often. So the first night I'm staying there, I go and take a little hike around the park's trails. It isn't even too late when I left, around 6 p.m., so I figured there was no big deal in exploring a little. I end up taking my time out there, and when I got back, it was already dark out. I'd say, I don't know, around 9 p.m. And when I got to my van, let me tell you, I have never been more furious in my life. All around my van, scattered, are my few precious belongings. My bedspread, all my clothes, books, everything. Just torn up, dirty, or otherwise thrown on the ground. The worst of it all, my doors, halfway torn off the hinges. Obviously, I assumed it was some kind of animal, but the thing was, I can't think of one damn animal strong enough to pull the doors of a van off of their hinges. So once I'm done cursing and being pissed off, I start to get kind of scared. You see, I noticed that even though my stuff was scattered around, nothing was actually missing. Except my mini fridge. And no, I don't mean the stuff inside my mini fridge, but the actual physical appliance. It was nuts. Whatever creature was in my van took my mini fridge and booked it. Needless to say, I was kind of freaked out. I started to clean up my stuff while picking everything up. Almost every single item had the most terrible stench on them. This was some next-level gross. First off, they smelled like urine. Straight nasty urine smell, and definitely not something with a healthy diet. It was foul. The second thing, maybe even stronger than the urine smell, was the fact that everything reeked of wet dog. Dirty wet dog, worse than any dog I've ever smelled, but still definitely the same scent. I figured that it would be best if I just packed my stuff up and left to go somewhere else. I have a bit of money saved up due to my budgeted lifestyle, but something told me that I should wait a while to try and see what the heck did this to my van. So I decided I'd spend the night. Just the night, and leave the next day. I'm lucky I escaped with my life, I think. Once it got dark, it of course began to rain. A lighter storm for sure, but annoying as heck with the no doors thing. I had a little pair of binoculars in my hiking backpack, so I stationed myself to look out the window of the driver's seat just in case I had to book it. For a while it was a whole lot of nothing, just me kind of half asleep to the rain sounds looking out of the window. But that's when I saw it. At first, swear to God, I thought it was just a really tall guy, just standing there out in the storm. So stupidly, I called out to him. It. That made it notice me, turn in my direction, and it was then when I realized that not only was this monster not a person, but it was sitting down. It stood up to almost 10 feet, I swear to you. It has these little beady eyes that you could tell just saw straight through you. A weird ass, almost cone-shaped head, covered top to bottom in fur. This sounds crazy, but I feel like it could have been a Sasquatch. The thing was built like a professional weightlifter too, massive biceps that probably explained how torn up my van was. Me and this giant, we locked eyes for a while and then it started coming closer. I freaked the out. What else could someone possibly do in a situation like this? Stay calm? I turned on the van, but it was stalling, and this felt like I was in my very own horror movie. It wasn't running at me so much as cautiously crawling, but I wasn't going to risk anything. I wanted out of there. Then, almost like fate, there was this giant lightning crack nearby. It wasn't in sight, but you could hear it loud as hell. This definitely scared me, but the creature, it ran for the hills. It definitely didn't like loud noises. I tried a few more times, then my van started. I lived to tell the tale too. But nobody thinks I'm being serious. They think it was a coyote pack or a crazy fox or something. So I figured if anyone believed me, it would be you.